Please let me know if it's coming through now. Okay. As soon as I know, I will start all over again with my opening. Let me check real quick. Wonderful. Okay. Sorry about that. I'll fix it in post. But all right, now let's start. Okay. So I felt really like I needed to talk about this subject right now for the reason that yesterday Eric Swalwell and Hakeem Jeffries both got on television and said that when they again take power after the midterms, that they will be coming after anyone who supports in any way President Trump. Now, here's the deal. We constantly hear the words democracy. This or that is a threat to democracy. The problem here is that we're not currently being educated on what a real democracy is, because a pure democracy is majority rule. Now, I don't know how you feel about this. However you feel about this, the facts, which is something that a lot of people don't want our children educated in anymore. The facts are that we had an election about a year ago. And in that election, one side won and one side lost. Now, if we were truly a fascist society today, then the people who lost would be silenced. But instead, they are constantly told to resist, resist, resist. Now, if they believed in democracy, if these people who are constantly saying a threat to democracy, et cetera, if they actually believed in democracy, they would step back and say, all right, well, the majority has won this round. But that's not what's happening, because for them, a threat to democracy is a threat to their will. And I want to say them. I'm not necessarily saying the Democrats. I'm not necessarily saying the leftists. I would say the uniparty, anybody who is against the majority voting a certain way and is fighting them at every step. And today, what we're going to do is go through education. And I'm going to show you places in our education where these things are, where the resistance is happening, and what specifically that means for our kids who are taught that we are a democracy rather than a constitutional republic, which is what we are. Our founding fathers were very much concerned about the idea that we would be a democracy. Today, I was at the Capitol. We read the entire Constitution. There's no place in it where it mentions the word democracy, because we are not. We are a constitutional republic. So, a democracy at its top means of the people. But what that means is that if in an ideal world, a straight democracy, 49% want something and 51% want something, that 51% who wins, they get it. And there's nothing that 49%, they just have to live under those terms. Does that seem where we are today? I don't know if you've looked recently, but there's all sorts of protests and riots going on right now from the same people who regularly use the term democracy. So, where does democracy come from? Well, over 2,000 years ago, Socrates raised serious concerns about democracy. He warned that when every voice has equal weight, every voice has equal weight. That sounds great to us, right? We want everybody to have equal rights. We want everybody to be treated as human beings. But when they're all equal, completely equal, well, you can let some pretty dumb ideas in. You can easily manipulate and change the way that a culture does things. Whether or not that is beneficial or not, it will change because of manipulation. So he compared democracy to a ship. If the passengers vote on who steers instead of letting the trained expert, and I am careful about this because progressives also believe in the expert class of people, but there's a difference in being an expert in your own life, and there's a difference between easily being manipulated. So when I talk to my students and I explained democracy to them, I said, well, at Christmas, I always throw a hot chocolate party, but the class that wins the most points, you guys, that class will get to have a pizza party as well. I'm only going to do that for one class, so you're going to have to work really hard. And I said, but what happens if one of you is deathly allergic to pepperoni, but the whole rest of the class, that's the only thing that they want? Well, then we have to have pepperoni and you have to deal. That's what it means to live in a democracy. There is no voice for the little person. So, um, which is why it's kind of crazy to me that those people who are saying, make your voice heard, make your voice heard, make your voice heard, are also saying in a democracy, democracy, democracy. They do not understand what a democracy actually is. So in Athens, democracy often turned into mob rule. In fact, Socrates himself was killed over democracy. People could go and they could drop a little rock in a piece of pottery, and based on how many rocks were in there, that was how decisions were made. Well, think about that. How easy could you get somebody to change their mind? How easy could you get somebody to change their mind if you had the media, if you had education, if you had, um, I mean, if you just paid them? How easy could you get somebody to change their mind and to vote against their best long-term interest for being manipulated, or what's also called the popular vote? So Socrates himself was condemned to death by that very system, voted out of life by a majority who feared that they feared his questions more than they valued truth. So oftentimes in a democracy, it's about emotion. And oftentimes in school right now, there is this ignore logos. Yes, ignore logos, embrace pathos, embrace emotion. So here in Utah, there is a teacher who has a teacher podcast, and he looks into the camera with his smoldering eyes and he says things that aren't necessarily true, but he leans into the emotion of people. And he talks to them in a way that gets them really, really interested in what it is that he has to say. And they will do whatever, even if it is not long term for the better. So from the very beginning, thinkers recognize that unrestrained democracy can devour itself. So that's the problem, is that democracy can sometimes, the idea of liberty can become more like libertarian, all over the place, doing whatever the heck you want. And that's not today's libertarian. That is the old fashioned libertarian that was maybe like a very highly sexual being. So our founding fathers knew history well, and that's why they drafted the Constitution. They gave us not a pure democracy, but a constitutional republic. Benjamin Franklin, when he left, he famously said, "I'm giving you a republic, madam, if you can keep it." We have been in danger of not keeping it at least since the 1930s. There is a famous, I want to say his name is Smoot, a famous man from the 1950s who does something on YouTube called A Republic, Not a Democracy. And he talks about how the media started saying in the 1930s, we are a democracy, a democracy, a democracy, because we will beat ourselves down We will stop understanding that we're a constitutional republic. If you repeat a lie long enough, you will come to the point where you believe it. The thing about a constitutional republic, the main thing, and this is important to understand from an American perspective, not every founding father was a Christian by today's view of Christianity. Even with all of the different sects of Christianity, not every founding father was that, but they acted as if. And their general belief was that the majority of your rights came from God. That's your inalienable rights. They can't be given to you from the government. We have started taking away the God, erasing God, and saying then the government makes all of the plans for you. So another thing that I saw recently that in the UK, they are pushing for digital ID. And they have said that with this digital ID, no one will be able to work if they don't have it by 2030. That just came out this week. I am recording. Someone just texted me and asked me if I am recording. Yes, I am. Okay. So the dangers of mob rule. Well, the French Revolution, mobs segregated, the majority ruled. And when the majority ruled, they could say, off with your head. Literally, they could behead you. And they could behead even down to children. The other thing about a mob is that a mob oftentimes, again, relies on emotion. They can become very uncivil. They can destroy things. They can dismantle things. They can, when they forget logic, when they forget to bring reason into the conversation and they just rely on emotion, they can do a lot of destruction. So today, when leaders call America a democracy, they push the idea that what matters is the majority approval, only they don't, right? Because we can say that they are pushing majority approval, but what happens when they're not the majority? When they're not the majority, they still continuously say it's a threat to democracy. So you have to understand that these people, when they say a threat to democracy, what they mean is a threat to us. It's a threat to our viewpoint. And really, what you could say is it's a threat to progressivism. Whatever it is that people want for progressivism, that's what it's a threat to. So, how do we reclaim the word republic? Well, in order to reclaim the word republic, we have to start educating our children on our own. And this page is a lot about educating the next generation. I'm going to show you, I'm going to share my screen with you and show you some of the things our children are being educated in. And two of the things that are very concerning about this is that it's a weaponization of words. So let me just share my screen. Of course, I didn't put my desktop on. Okay. Hold on. And what I'm going to is a page called Parents Defending Ed. And then I'm going to look up ethnic studies. I would encourage you to do the same. So if you go to Parents Defending Education, I'm going to go here and I'm going to type in ethnic studies. They have an indoctrination map. Close these people out. Go up here and type in ethnic studies. And then I'm going to show you. Now, ethnic studies, what do we think it means? Ethnic studies, it sounds like we want to just talk about different cultures. Remember, diversity is our strength. So that's what it sounds like. We want to say diversity is our strength. So let's look up all about ethnic studies, and find out what the actual goal is here. Liberated higher education, ethnic studies in the academic march towards intolerance. Push the teachings about cis heteronormativity. What? Cis heteronormativity in that means a normal version of who is that means a version of who is normal based on someone who is comfortable in skin, a man being a man, a woman being a woman. What does that have to do with ethnic studies? Most ethnicities still rely on common sense. Only in the West have we been told to adopt the emperor's new clothes. But most groups, that's not what they're doing. So I think I'll go here. So this is San Diego Unified School District Ethnic Studies. San Diego Unified District's Ethnic Studies course feature content such as critical race theory, oppression, privilege, power, white fragility, and whiteness. So what our kids are getting under the name of ethnic studies that no parent is going to object to because nobody wants to be called a racist. No one wants to be called a racist. And so because of that, they will say, bring it in. Of course, no problem. So I'm just going to show you what is ethnic studies. ES is the study of perspectives, knowledge, experiences, and contributions of people of color within the text of indigeneity, and roots, colonialism, hegemony, and regeneration. What does ethnic studies in the classroom look like? You will engage with a narrative about ethnic studies classrooms by hunting for connections to the ideas and concepts that we covered during kickoff week. Developing practice, there you go. This little fist right here is the Marxist fist, or the fist of resistance. Children doing land acknowledgement. So I want to talk to you about land acknowledgement. I do a lot of work with people who have escaped communism. It's something I'm very interested in because Marxist ideology promotes this. Let's take meeting the ethnic studies graduation requirement. Coming back here to the Marxist fist to resistance. Whose land are you on? Okay, land acknowledgements started in South Africa. In South Africa, people were supposed to say, we acknowledge that we are on stolen land. They were fine with that, right? Because it has to be this very slow boiled thing that's happening. So the people were fine with being slow boiled into the idea that they were on stolen land. And then they needed to make reparations for that land. And eventually the reparations added up to the next thing. You needed to give away your land. You needed to get off your land. If you didn't get off your land, extreme violence could happen. That is what happens with the miseducation of our people and of our children. So let's look at mandatory ethnic studies. Mandatory, mind you. You cannot graduate without this. Graduation requirements beginning for the class of 2024, identity and relationships, English literature and ethnic studies, identity and power around the world. Another big problem here with the whole teaching is that we're not teaching our kids perspectives. And they'll say it all the time. Oh, we're learning perspectives. Only you're not, because every perspective has to be exactly the same. So we aren't teaching. Once again, we are manipulating. That ties all the way back into the whole pure democracy, because it's so easy to manipulate people when they only have one version of something. It's not double-sided. They don't, nuance is cut out. And that is part of Marxist ideology. You have to be silenced if you don't speak exactly what they want you to, especially as a minority. Um, Bullets of Truth, English, and public services. So here's one. I don't know that this is what this is about. However, I do know that we will say that our children need to be more civically engaged. And so we'll go to civics and we'll think, "Oh, that sounds perfect. We want our kids to know how the government works." But that's not what civic engagement means. Civic engagement often presents something I've seen recently, presents that uh, Donald Trump has a fraught relationship with newcomers. That's very loaded language to give to our students without saying, by the way, newcomers that are coming here illegally, that are taking benefits, and potentially the next generation's jobs. That conversation isn't being had. Our curriculum is starting to teach our kids one narrative and one narrative only, and that's not teaching. It is not teaching to not say, sure, we can feel bad for these people. These terrible things have happened. And also, these same people who these terrible things are happening to, they don't treat this group of people very well either. But we rob our kids, we rob ourselves of that. I didn't know. In fact, if you would have asked me 5 years ago, I would have said we were a democracy too, because that's what I was told. And I had to dig and learn for myself. And that is really the solution, is that you have to know what's going on, because if you know what's going on, then you can go home and have conversations with your children yourself. Let me keep on going. So critique our relationship to forms of power and oppression. How are you acknowledging and naming impacts and forms of power and oppression, such as racism and, patriarchy? See how it's not a, do you feel this way? It's a, this is happening and you need to respond this way about it. Challenge imperialistic and coloniality beliefs. I'm not sure that's a word. And practices on personal and systemic levels. This is a challenge that your child is supposed to get before they can graduate. And the 7 C's are their competencies. You will hear that in most schools. We want our children to be competent. Here are the competencies that they're supposed to have. So challenge imperialist and coloniality beliefs and practices on personal and systemic levels. Courses, a 2023 Freedom of Information Act filed by Zacher Legal has revealed that San Diego Unified School District's ethnic studies courses use Robin DiAngelo's white fragility and Peggy McIntosh's white privilege, unpacking the invisible knapsack, as course texts. Robin DiAngelo, by many people, is seen to be a grifter, but her opinions are being presented to our children. And why this matters is because our children will be the next voters. And if they're not being taught a fair and balanced education, they're going to vote for their own demise. That's what's going on in our schools right now. Let's go with this course presents an interdisciplinary study of traditionally marginalized populations in the United States, specifically African American, Asian American, Chicano, and Latino, Native American, through a social justice, which I always call social injustice pedagogy and perspective. I don't want that for my child. I don't want that for any child. And I voted against it. And so did the majority of Americans. And yet they're doing it anyway. So much for democracy, right? These same people who constantly say this is a threat to democracy, the majority already spoke. Let's see. I can find any more on this page or not. I might move up to another one. I have seen some of the most tragic things. Pictures of noses being measured to see who has any black blood in them. Imagine, and I don't know about you, but I've got a high schooler. And if they started measuring noses in classes, a lot of jokes, a lot of not very sensitive remarks would happen. But yet, that's presented to our kids as normal. The march toward intolerance, 100%. Across the country, ethnic studies, especially liberated, remember that word, liberated or critical ethnic studies, is becoming more ingrained in higher education, but it's also coming down. While some institutions only offer a handful of ethnic studies courses, others have their own departments dedicated to this area of study. In my town of Utah, or my state of Utah, we are actively in 2025, after DEI supposedly removed, we're actively looking for equity advocates inside our schools. Equity means equal outcomes. Most people don't want equal outcomes. I am filming right now in a small bedroom, smaller than many people's bathrooms. People don't want to live, people don't want to change the way that what they've earned and how they've lived. And the question is should they? Should you have to give away what you've worked hard for because people think it's unfair? And where does the unfair stop? Because another big issue, when you manipulate people into only responding with their emotions, another big part of that problem is that you also turn them into people who are constantly focused on themselves and constantly focused on their group. So I was listening today to some people who have to do with Gaza, but then there was another study showing how bad things are in the Sudan for Africans. And when people say, well, how come you'll talk about Gaza, but you won't talk about what's going in the Sudan for Africans? I believe a lot of that is because the Sudanese people who are being persecuted, they're being genocided are Christians, and Muslims are going through, and I mean radical Islamists are going through and killing families. They're burning them. In some places they're beheading them. And we're not having that conversation. And we're not having that conversation why one minority group would do that to another minority group. That's the human condition. And again, it's a conversation that we don't have. So our founding fathers understood that when a man is left to his own devices, he will become authoritarian. So when we have a group of people and every single group is told, you are the most important thing, you are the top priority, then they start infighting with each other. They're already doing that. And that's not even including the part where they look to the other group, the real out group, and they push them out. Within their own groups, they're destroying. This is about constantly dismantling. And the problem with a democracy is that we don't have to educate our populace. We only have to bribe and manipulate them. Whereas when you have a constitutional republic, you're trying to elect the very best people. And trust me, you get it wrong sometimes. But you're trying to elect the very best people. And those people, you're trying to say, okay, you know this stuff like the back of your hand. We trust you to protect us, and we will do our part as well in a Pure democracy, we just say, oh, sure, whatever, we'll trust you. And unfortunately, the smoothest talker or the most well-oiled hand is who gets elected. So as citizens, our duty isn't just to vote with the crowd. It's to preserve the principles that guard against the crowd. It's what keeps us human instead of turning into crazy animals who believe that to loot, to steal, to take from others is somehow justified. To protect speech, including speech that we don't like. So, once again, when the press can be used to manipulate you, when the press can say things that are absolutely untrue, that is more likely to be used in that democracy. It's more likely to be used to manipulate you, especially if you've got the press and education working together. Something that I covered last week was digital media literacy. That is the press and education working together. That means that a child goes and says, okay, I'm going to do a report on X. I'm going to look up this material. And all of a sudden, a sign comes up that says you can't use this page to look up your material because it's unsafe. But instead, you can use Wiki, or instead, you can use NPR or CNN. But anybody who's not on our approved list is deemed unsafe. And those are the same people who want you to believe that we are only and purely a democracy. To defend the rights, even of those that we disagree with, to a point. And that's what makes America different. Now, I will be honest with you. I am reading my notes from ChatGPT, and I don't necessarily agree with defending all of the rights, even if those I disagree with. Today, somebody had said that human rights mean that we should pay for the benefits of illegals based on human rights. I don't agree with that. There are things that I can't buy for my own self or for my family. I don't believe that I should have to have my taxes paying for those same things for people who have come here illegally, or for people who've come here to take rather to contribute. I have went much faster than I intended to go. So I'm just going to take a look real quick and see if I've got anything. Oh, well, that's better. Okay, yes, I can hear you. Should be the 8Cs. They neglected compliant. I don't understand what that says. This is why my husband and I try to vote for those that uphold God, family, and freedom most. Absolutely. The problem is that sometimes people can use language to manipulate. So we have to be informed. One of the things that I have been most concerned about was watching teachers tell students, you know what, politics are really heavy. You don't really need to be involved with them. You don't need to care. And I'm talking about high school students. Telling high school students that they don't need to care is a form of manipulation in its own, as far as I'm concerned. Once again, these are the same people who would say democracy 80 times in the classroom instead of saying that we're a constitutional republic. So I think that that's a massive, massive problem. So how do we then educate our kids? Let me just pull that up. The first thing is you've got to talk to them every single day. You've got to use the right language. Use that language that we are a constitutional republic. Explain that to your kids. Watch videos with them. What I like to do is I like to watch videos with my students that are both things I agree with and things that I don't. And I like to ask them, now let's sit and let's listen to these words. Do you hear any words that might manipulate you or try to change your mind? Words where they say something and they make you think that it's true, but they also kind of give themselves a way out. They might say, take an example. Well, right now the president is repeating history because he's got troops on the street and it looks just like the Gestapo. You could say that's an opinion, right? But to a young person, that's not necessarily a person, or that's not necessarily an opinion. They are taking that as truth. So when we're looking at that, we need to break that down with our kids, with our students, and just say, okay, what does the Gestapo look like? When I was talking to my students yesterday about the Second Amendment and about what happened when they took away the guns of Jewish people, I said, now let's remember these were citizens of Germany. So you have to drop as much truth as you can while you are learning that you have to drop as much truth as you can so that while they're learning, while they're in the process, you can stop and say, let's remember this. Let's remember this little tactic. Like I said in the beginning with my little jar of rocks, which maybe you guys didn't hear, but with my little jar of rocks in the classroom, the reason that I have that is not just so that we can gamify education, but because I want them to always think about Socrates dying because people put rocks in a jar. Like those kind of little tiny things will make them think, oh, Socrates died because of that. That reminds me, oh, that's what democracy was. Democracy is mob rule. How do we have those kind of questions? Have I thought of putting my lessons on different topics? Okay, question. Have you thought about putting your lessons on different topics on video? Yes. I'm trying to work on that right now. Once again, you guys missed it, but I have a really nice camera and I know that there's a system so that I don't have to do all of my stuff over Zoom, but I'm so technologically not there. I'm going to work on it this month with my husband and try and get the quality of video better. And then, yes, I will start talking about the subjects and how I drop truth into a subject. Even when I'm talking about ancient history, how can I drop relevant things today into that ancient history conversation that are simply true, that are unobjectionable, unless you are a person who doesn't believe in truth. And we have to understand we are dealing with people who believe there is no truth but power, which is why they can say this is a threat to our democracy while not following the rules of democracy in the first place, because they don't believe in it. They don't believe in it for themselves. They don't believe in it for their ideological group. They will say, oh, we are all about unity, but they're not. Let me go back to that liberated education and share my screen again and just liberated education. Hopefully I do this right. Okay. Okay, good. Liberated higher education, ethnic studies, and the academic march towards intolerance. When it came to Socrates, they didn't like that he was saying the truth. They didn't like that he was asking questions and requiring reason. They wanted an emotion-based, this feels good, let's do it society. The scariest thing that I can think of, I mean, there's a lot of scary things I can think of right now, but one of the scariest things I can think of is that we're intentionally, after everything we've learned in history, now we are intentionally socially conditioning our children to want what feels good, to be as Yuri, not Yuri Bezmenov, Yuri from World Economic Forum says, to be a useless class of people. And I knew that with gaming, and our social media, etc. But I didn't know that they would put it into the language in curriculum where it actually says students should be taught to ignore logos and to embrace pathos, as that is more effective in meeting their aims. And that's literally in a curriculum book. I can tell you which curriculum book if I can find it on this list. How about this? This free lesson plan here. Ethnic Studies Initiative lesson plan, radical ideology, protest art, and the movement of a Black life lesson. Linked to controversial far left media and people, protest art for a cause. I have a book on one of my shelves that is How to Turn Art into Activism. And once again, it's constantly saying the same things over and over, one side of something. George Floyd was a martyr, so he got a glass coffin. There's a whole lot more to that story, but that's what's presented to our kids as truth. A privileged and marginalized social identity wheel. Oh, $19 million to universities in support of ethnic studies programs. And I'm nervous about that because while we move money around and say, oh, we're not going to focus on this identity group, for example, the current administration just decided that they would change mental health in schools. They shut it down and now they've reopened it and they said, but we're not going to focus on different identity groups. It doesn't matter because if you're over here because of the work I do on Radical Center with Leslie and Christine, you will know that mental health has been co-opted. Now, are there good people? Yes. But as Alvin Louis recently said in Encourages the Habit, which when I say these things, I really hope you will rewind, write them down, and go look at their work. I'm not trying to steal anybody's work. I just think that the more voices talking about it, you're going to find the person that resonates with you. But Alvin Louis, Courage is a Habit, he said, so many people want to say, oh, but it's just a few bad apples. It's not. The orchard is poisonous. How can an orchard not be poisonous if we're teaching children protest art, only showing them far left people, Ibram X. Kendi, Robin DiAngelo, Ta-Nehisi Coates? They don't get to know who Thomas Sowell is. He has to be silent and he has to be silenced because he is guilty of wrongthink. A privileged or marginalized social wheel. How does that bring our children together? How does that foster a society where you have respect and love for your fellow man? It doesn't. And the people who say it does, well, they're raking in the bucks while they're making your kids sick. And they're making it permanent because they're teaching your kids. I can't say it. They're not teaching your kids. They're indoctrinating your kids. They are telling your kids there's only one thing. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine reading a book where there's only the good guy or only the bad guy? That's what's going on in education. I wanted to find a very specific book. There's more. There's the Resist Phase, Land Back. So land back is to say that any land that America has that, for instance, Mexico or California should be given back to Mexico, or Texas should be given back to Mexico. That's what the land back movement is. Your kids are presented it as if it's the only option. It's the only truth. Here we go. Ethnic studies, but yet we have drag pedagogy, the playful practice of queer imagination in early childhood, equitable grading, same outcomes for every person. And again, they're going to believe equality is best. Liberated ethnic studies model, Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed. I learned about pedagogy of the oppressed because a teacher yelled at me in my face and told me, maybe if you read Pedagogy of the Oppressed, you would understand, which I found extremely amusing because I could play the Oppression Olympics all day long. I just don't find it beneficial to a happy, healthy, compassionate life. Here's a favorite one: revolutionizing. Revolutionizing education, youth participatory action, research in motion. So much of our clubs lean towards activism. We have something right now, and it's I think it's called the Mountain. Ashley, if you're here and you put that in, I would love it. But the Mountain of clubs. And all of these clubs are supposed to move us towards social justice. Revolution. The kids think of it as like hippie headbands and bell bottoms, right? They are not told how many people have to die in a revolution. They are not told that you have to have a group that you hate. We're literally signing up to teach our kids hatred. Teach Palestine. So in other words, teach anti-Semitism. Whiteness as property. Okay, let's break that one down shortly. Whiteness is property. So once again, these hypocrites, because that's the only word for them, these hypocrites who think that we should abolish private property are making millions of dollars being the experts in these subjects. Do you think they're going to give away their newfound property? I don't either. This article posits that racial identity and property are deeply interrelated concepts. Professor Harris examines how whiteness, initially constructed as a form of racial identity, evolved into a form of property, historically and presently acknowledged and protected by American law. Again, our kids are being miseducated. They are being taught these things as if they are true, not as if they are a theory. That's another thing that I do in my classroom as much as I can, is I say, am I teaching you a fact or a theory? And how do you know? You know, because I use words like perhaps, or some people think. Those are theory words. A fact would be in 1776, this happened. Those are factual words. So we have to teach our kids that there are two things. In fact, there's a bunch of other different things because in the theory world, anything goes, right? But as long as they are taught this, and I'm about to wrap up, I promise. Goodness. Like to stop sharing. As long as they are taught this, our kids are going to vote progressive. It's the only thing they're going to know. So when fucking Jeffries and Eric Swalwell, when they accuse people and say they're creating massive injustices by, let's say, arresting or accusing people in Congress of doing unsavory things. But they're forgetting that all of President Trump's lawyers, almost all of them, were either arrested or threatened to be arrested. They are presenting things that we found out just in the last week about how many FBI agents were present at January 6th, and they're reframing that. Reframing. Once again, they're teaching our kids something and they're saying it is the only truth. And they're leaving out the other parts. They're leaving out the part where Joe Biden stood on a screen or stood on a stage flanked by two Marines with all of this red around him and said, half of America is a threat to democracy. So they're presenting utter lies to our kids. And our kids aren't even allowed to question it. They don't even know that they should question it. And so when it comes to go up and to put those little rocks in the clay jars and to vote, they're going to vote on whatever makes them feel good. And the only way to stop it, my friends, literally the only way to stop it is to do the heavy, heavy lifting of knowing what's going on and talking to your kids about things that you would never have thought you needed to talk to your kids about. All right, my friends, that is my presentation on this subject. I'm going to clean it up. I'm going to download it and then clean it up, and I will see you next week. If you have a topic that you would like me to cover, please put it in the chat and I will work on making that video. Thanks. Bye.